My family didn't invite me to Thanksgiving, so I bought the cafe they booked instead. Stay with me till the end, because this story still shocks me when I think about it. And if it moves you, I'd love it if you supported the channel with a like, subscribe, and maybe even sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Tessa Rowland was 28, always juggling part-time jobs and small design gigs while trying to put her portfolio together. She wasn't the type of person people saw as successful, at least not in the way her family measured it. But she had heart, she worked hard, and she dreamed bigger than anyone gave her credit for. Thanksgiving was the one holiday she held close to her chest. She didn't care about Christmas gifts or New Year fireworks. Thanksgiving meant family, food, and tradition. It meant everyone gathered together, laughing around a table, pretending for just one night that life wasn't so complicated. Every year, no matter how invisible she felt, she still showed up with her homemade pie and a smile. But this year felt different before it even started. Her mother had been short with her on the phone, her sister hadn't returned her messages, and her brother only sent a single thumbs up when she texted about plans. Still, she told herself it was nothing. Families got busy. Maybe the details weren't set yet. The truth came crashing down one evening when her cousin Jordan let something slip. They were chatting casually, and Jordan mentioned how excited she was to try the pumpkin cheesecake at Seabreeze Café. Tessa froze. "Wait," she asked slowly. "What do you mean Seabreeze Café?" Jordan went pale, realizing she'd said too much. She stammered, trying to change the subject, but it was too late. Piece by piece, Tessa pulled the truth out of her cousin. Her entire family, her parents, her siblings, even some relatives, had booked a big Thanksgiving dinner at that cafe. And not one of them had bothered to invite her. When Tessa asked why, Jordan finally whispered the words that broke her heart. "Your mom said, you always bring the mood down." It felt like someone had taken a knife and twisted it inside her. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. They had planned a holiday without her. They wanted Thanksgiving, but not with her sitting at the table. Tessa sat in her tiny apartment that night, staring at her hands. All the years of being pushed aside, all the moments of being made to feel like an afterthought, it had all led to this. She realized something sharp and cold. She wasn't just forgotten. She was unwanted. And that was the moment when something inside her shifted. If they didn't want her at their table, then she would make sure they could never eat at it without remembering her. She didn't know how yet, but she knew one thing for certain. This betrayal wouldn't end quietly. Tessa had grown up feeling like the shadow no one wanted to see. In the Rowland family, there was always a golden child, and it was never her. Camille, her older sister, had been the shining star since high school. At 34, she was a realtor who could sell houses before the ink was even dry on the listings. Her parents, Diane and Howard, couldn't stop bragging about her success. Every family dinner seemed to turn into Camille's victory parade. New clients, record sales, her picture in glossy brochures. Then there was Evan, 3 years older than Tessa, who had stepped neatly into the tech world. He was the brilliant son, the one who was praised for his cleverness and steady paycheck. When Evan talked, their parents listened with admiration, asking follow-up questions, beaming with pride. If he so much as mentioned a project at work, Diane would clasp her hands and declare how lucky they were to have raised such an achiever. And then there was Tessa, 28, working part-time jobs to pay rent while trying to get her design portfolio off the ground. She didn't have a fancy salary or a shiny title to impress anyone with. Her parents never introduced her to their friends with pride. Instead, they'd frown and say things like, "She still hasn't found a stable career." That word, stable, hung over her like a curse. It wasn't just the present that hurt. The pattern stretched back years, and the memories haunted her like echoes. She remembered her college graduation. Everyone's families had come with balloons and flowers, shouting their children's names when they crossed the stage. But when she looked out into the crowd, her parents weren't there. They had gone to celebrate with Camille, who had just closed on her first big house sale. Tessa's diploma felt heavy in her hands, but her heart felt even heavier. She remembered the time she had shown her parents her sketchbook, filled with designs she had worked on for weeks. She had been so proud, flipping through page after page of her ideas. Diane had barely glanced at it before saying, "These look like scribbles, sweetheart. Maybe focus on something practical." Howard had nodded, not unkindly, but in a way that closed the door on her excitement. That night, she had stuffed the sketchbook into a drawer and cried into her pillow. Even her attempts to help were brushed aside. Once, when her father's office needed a flyer, She had designed one for free, pouring hours into making it perfect. Evan had taken one look at it and said, "Why didn't you just hire a real designer?" Her father had agreed, thanking her but never using her work. Sitting alone now, all those memories stacked up inside her, layer after painful layer. It wasn't just this Thanksgiving she had been excluded from. It was her entire life. She was always the extra piece, the one that didn't quite fit. The truth settled over her like a weight. She wasn't just overlooked by accident. She had been pushed aside again and again, until she barely existed in their eyes. And for the first time, she felt the anger burning hotter than the hurt. It was late in the evening when Tessa met up with her cousin Jordan for coffee. Jordan was the only one in the family who ever truly checked on her, the only one who saw past the labels and judgments. Their conversations were usually lighthearted, filled with little jokes and updates. But that night, Jordan let something slip that made Tessa's world tilt. "I can't wait to try the pumpkin cheesecake at Seabreeze Café," Jordan said, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. Tessa froze. Her chest tightened. "Seabreeze Café? For what?" she asked, her voice careful but sharp around the edges. Jordan's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. "Oh, never mind. Forget I said anything." But Tessa wasn't about to let it go. She leaned forward, her heart pounding, her voice firmer now. "Jordan, tell me what's happening at Seabreeze Café." Her cousin shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip. After a long pause, Jordan whispered, "It's where everyone's having Thanksgiving dinner this year." The words hit Tessa like a slap. She blinked, trying to process them. "Everyone?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. Jordan nodded slowly, guilt written all over her face. "Your parents, Camille, Evan, even Uncle Ray and Aunt Lisa. They made reservations weeks ago." Tessa felt the air leave her lungs. She waited for Jordan to say it was a mistake, that her invite must have been lost, but the silence stretched too long. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked finally, her throat tight. Jordan hesitated, then spoke so softly it was almost painful. "Your mom said she thought you'd bring the mood down, that it would just be easier without you there." For a moment, Tessa couldn't move. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Every part of her wanted to deny it, to tell herself Jordan must have misunderstood. But deep down, she knew it was true. She could hear Diane's voice in those words, cold and dismissive, cutting straight into her like a knife. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't a scheduling error. It was a choice. They had sat down, planned this dinner, and decided she didn't belong. Her chest ached, and for a second, the sadness threatened to swallow her whole. But as the sting spread deeper, something else began to stir inside her. A heat. A defiance. She had spent years shrinking in their presence, accepting the scraps of affection they gave her. But now, she realized she couldn't let them win by breaking her completely. If they didn't want her at the table, then fine. She wouldn't beg for a chair. Instead, she would flip the script. She would take the very place they thought they could use to celebrate without her. That night, lying awake in her small apartment, Tessa made herself a promise. She wasn't just going to be excluded. She was going to make sure they never forgot what they had done. If they shut her out of the table, she would own the whole table. And this Thanksgiving, it wouldn't be her who felt small. It would be them. The next afternoon, Tessa walked along the waterfront, the cool breeze tugging at her hair. Seabreeze Café sat at the corner of the pier, its windows glowing with warm light, its tables filled with couples and families enjoying early dinners. She paused for a moment, staring at the place. This was it, the cafe her family had chosen for Thanksgiving. Her chest tightened at the thought, but instead of walking away, she pushed the door open. Inside, the cafe smelled of roasted coffee and fresh bread. The decor was cozy but worn, with chipped paint on the wooden counter and lights that flickered faintly. Behind the counter stood Maribel Ortiz, the owner, who greeted Tessa with a tired but kind smile. "First time here?" Maribel asked as she handed her a menu. "Yes," Tessa said, sliding into a booth. She ordered tea, but instead of scrolling on her phone like the other customers, she watched Maribel. There was something in her posture, an exhaustion hidden behind the polite smile. When Maribel came by with the steaming cup, Tessa asked gently, "Busy day?" Maribel chuckled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Busy days are the only reason this place is still standing. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can keep it up. The bills pile higher every month, and the repairs never stop. Sometimes I think it would be easier just to sell and let someone else carry the weight. The words caught Tessa off guard. "Sell," she repeated. Maribel sighed, sliding into the seat across from her for a moment. I love this cafe. It's been my life for years. But love doesn't pay the rent. If I find the right buyer, I'd let it go. I need a fresh start. Tessa sat there, her mind racing. She had come only to see the place, to picture her family laughing around tables that she wasn't invited to. But now, hearing Maribel's words, a spark lit inside her chest. Sell. The cafe could be hers. Her thoughts went back to her grandmother, the only person who had ever truly believed in her dreams. Before passing, she had left Tessa a small savings account. Tessa had never touched it, too afraid of wasting the money on something unworthy. But what if this was what it was meant for? Not just a purchase, but a statement. Her family thought she didn't belong at their table. Fine. Then she would buy the very place they thought they could enjoy without her. They would sit down expecting to celebrate, and instead they would find her, the black sheep, the overlooked daughter, standing at the head of the cafe they thought was theirs for the night. Tessa felt her heart pound, not from hurt this time, but from determination. For the first time in years, she saw a way to turn the pain into power. She smiled faintly, sipping her tea as Maribel walked away to serve another customer. The decision formed in her mind, clear and unshakable. She would buy Seabreeze Cafe, and Thanksgiving would never be the same again. The decision didn't happen overnight. Tessa spent days running numbers on scratch paper, calling banks, and rereading the letter her grandmother had left her with the savings account details. Every time she hesitated, she reminded herself of her family's laughter echoing in Seabreeze Cafe without her. That image was enough to harden her resolve. She wasn't just buying a building, she was buying back her dignity. Maribel was hesitant at first. The cafe had been her life for more than a decade, and handing it over wasn't easy. But when she saw the fire in Tessa's eyes, she softened. They met at the corner booth late at night after closing hours, cups of coffee between them. The contract draft spread across the table. You're young, Maribel said, searching Tessa's face. Do you understand what you're taking on? This place will eat your time, your money, and sometimes even your sanity. I understand, Tessa replied, steady. But I also know what it feels like to be overlooked. I need something of my own. This cafe, it's not just a business. It's my chance. Maribel studied her for a long moment before nodding. Then I think you're the right one for it. The paperwork was signed within weeks. With a firm handshake and tears glistening in Maribel's eyes, the cafe became Tessa's. Standing behind the counter that first morning, keys in her hand, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd ever known. For the first time, she wasn't the family disappointment or the forgotten daughter, she was an owner. But she didn't stop there. Tessa poured herself into transforming the cafe. She hired 2 new staff members, young servers who needed opportunities just like she once had. She painted the walls a fresh coastal blue, added warm lights, and replaced the chipped counter with polished wood that gleamed under the glow. Her sketchbooks, once dismissed as scribbles, finally had purpose. She designed the new menus herself, with delicate illustrations of leaves and waves dancing along the borders. The work was exhausting, but every brushstroke and every decision carried meaning. This wasn't just decor. It was her reclaiming the parts of herself her family had tried to crush. Each day she walked through the door, she felt her confidence grow stronger. As the grand reopening approached, she circled the date on the calendar, Thanksgiving. That would be the night her family walked in, expecting a holiday without her, and instead found themselves under her roof. The thought of it made her both nervous and exhilarated. It wasn't about humiliating them. It was about showing them she was not someone to be brushed aside anymore. On the eve of the holiday, she stood at the window of Seabreeze Cafe, looking out at the water as the sun set. The sign above the door glowed in the twilight. For everyone else, it was just a cafe. For Tessa, it was her declaration, her independence, her revenge. Thanksgiving was coming, and this time, the table would be hers. Thanksgiving evening came crisp and cool, the air filled with the faint scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifting from kitchens all across town. Inside Seabreeze Cafe, candles flickered on every table, casting a warm golden glow across the room. The staff moved gracefully between the guests, pouring wine and serving appetizers. Everything was prepared, just as Tessa had planned. Her cafe was alive, thriving, and humming with energy. Tonight wasn't just another holiday. It was the night she had marked on her calendar, the night she had been waiting for. At precisely 7 o'clock, the Rowlands walked through the door. They entered as though the world belonged to them, heads held high, laughter spilling out, coats draped over their arms. Camille was in the lead, her heels clicking against the floor. She was dressed in a sharp red dress, the kind that screamed money and confidence. "I can't wait to tell everyone about the house I'm closing on," she announced loudly, as if the room existed to hear her victories. Behind her came Evan, his phone in his hand, already mid-conversation about his latest work promotion. "Yeah, the team couldn't have done it without me," he said into the receiver, grinning proudly before slipping it into his pocket. He glanced around with approval, nodding at the cafe as though he had chosen it himself. Diane followed close behind, her pearls gleaming under the soft light. She scanned the room with a critical eye, leaning toward Howard. "The decor is fine, I suppose, but the lighting could be softer. It feels a little casual, don't you think?" Howard nodded absently, always the quieter one, content to let Diane's judgments fill the air. The host greeted them with warmth, guiding them to the long table near the window, the very spot Tessa had reserved for this night. They settled into their seats, smug and satisfied, completely unaware of who truly held the strings now. Wine was poured, and the Rolands laughed together, their voices rising above the clinking of glasses and the gentle music playing in the background. For a moment, Tessa stood in the kitchen doorway, watching them from the shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm. She smoothed the lapel of her tailored navy jacket, the kind she had bought to mark this new chapter of her life. She had spent years being underestimated, invisible. Tonight, she would no longer hide. With steady steps, she walked out onto the floor. The staff glanced at her knowingly, giving small nods of support as she moved toward the Rolands' table. The laughter at the table faltered as she came into view. Camille's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Evan leaned back, his smile fading. Diane's eyes narrowed in confusion. Howard shifted uncomfortably, sensing a tension he couldn't yet name. Tessa stopped at the head of their table, standing tall, her jacket catching the glow of the candles. Her voice was calm, controlled, but it carried through the room with quiet authority. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the family who had cast her out. For the first time in years, they had nothing to say. They simply froze, staring at the daughter they thought they had erased, now standing in front of them, powerful and unshaken. The silence around the table stretched, heavy and awkward, until Diane finally broke it. Her voice carried the sharpness Tessa knew all too well. "What on earth are you doing here, Tessa?" she demanded, her pearl necklace glinting as she sat up straighter. "This is a private family dinner." Tessa tilted her head, a calm smile playing on her lips. "Didn't you know?" she said evenly. "I own this cafe now." For a second, the words hung in the air, too absurd for them to believe. Camille burst into laughter, shaking her head as if it were the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving a manicured hand. "You, owning this place? Don't be ridiculous." But before Tessa could even respond, Maribel appeared from behind the counter. She gave Tessa a small, supportive nod, then turned to the family. "She's not joking. The papers were signed weeks ago. Seabreeze Cafe belongs to her now." The laughter drained from Camille's face. She blinked, caught between disbelief and irritation. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. Evan leaned back in his chair, his mouth twisted in a sneer. "Of course," he said coldly. "This is a stunt. You've always been desperate for attention, Tessa. What better way to pull the spotlight back to yourself than by pretending you've suddenly turned into some kind of business owner?" Tessa didn't flinch. She met his gaze steadily, her voice low but strong. "This isn't a stunt. This is my reality. While you were all so busy convincing yourselves I was a failure, I was working, saving, planning. And now, I own the very place you thought you could celebrate Thanksgiving without me." The words seemed to slice through the air. Camille shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line, and Howard kept his eyes on the table, clearly wishing he could disappear. But Tessa wasn't finished. Years of being dismissed and ridiculed had built up inside her, and now it was time to let the truth spill. "You didn't forget to invite me," she said, her voice steady but edged with pain. "You decided I didn't belong. You decided I'd ruin the mood. Just like you decided my art was nothing but scribbles. Just like you ignored my graduation, because Camille had a house to sell. Just like you laughed when I tried to help, when I tried to show you that what I do matters." Her words struck with precision, each memory she spoke pulling a flinch from someone at the table. Camille's cheeks flushed red. Diane's eyes flickered with guilt, though she tried to mask it with anger. Even Evan's smug expression faltered for a moment before he looked away. Tessa straightened her shoulders, her calm smile returning. You spent years telling me I wasn't enough. Tonight, you get to sit in the cafe that proves you were wrong. The silence that followed was heavier than before, no one daring to meet her eyes. For once, it was Tessa who held all the power. The air inside Seabreeze Cafe was thick with tension, though the soft glow of the lanterns and the warm aroma of roasted turkey should have made it feel festive. Diane's eyes narrowed across the table, her polished nails tapping impatiently on the linen. Camille smirked as though the whole scene amused her, while Evan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, radiating disdain. Only Jordan shifted uneasily, her gaze darting between her family and her cousin, as though silently pleading for civility. Tessa stood at the head of the table, calm but unyielding. Her tailored jacket caught the light, a small crown of authority. Here's the truth, she said evenly, her voice carrying through the room. You didn't want me at your Thanksgiving, so I gave you exactly what you asked for. You can stay and eat, but as paying customers. No exceptions. Diane's mouth fell open as though Tessa had just spoken in another language. Paying customers? She scoffed, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Tessa, don't be ridiculous. We're family. Family doesn't pay. Tessa's lips curved into a cold smile. Family also doesn't lie to keep someone away from the table. Yet here we are. Camille let out a short, cruel laugh. So this is your grand revenge? Making us buy dinner at some little waterfront cafe? Please, Tessa. You've always been so dramatic. But when Maribel, standing behind the counter, quietly nodded to confirm that the cafe was indeed under Tessa's ownership, Camille's laugh faltered. The staff, servers in neat aprons, cooks peeking from the kitchen, watched with quiet interest, some folding their arms in subtle solidarity. For once, Tessa wasn't the outcast in the room. Evan leaned forward, sneering. You think this makes you better than us? This is pathetic. I won't pay a dime to sit here. He shoved back his chair, expecting the others to follow. But Jordan's voice cut through, trembling but fierce. Then maybe you should leave, Evan. Because I'll pay. She reached for her purse, her chin lifting proudly. Tessa deserves this moment. More than you'll ever understand. A ripple went through the cafe. One of the servers moved closer to Tessa's side, as if to stand guard. Another placed a gentle hand on Jordan's shoulder, as though silently thanking her for speaking out. The loyalty in that room, the kind Tessa had longed for from her own blood, was there now, surrounding her, protecting her. Diane sputtered, unwilling to give in, but her voice had lost its bite. This isn't how families treat each other. Tessa's gaze sharpened. You're right. Families don't treat each other like this. You taught me that. So tonight you'll eat on my terms, or not at all. For the first time in her life, the power sat firmly in her hands. And she wasn't about to let it go. The Seabreeze Cafe had never held such silence and noise all at once. Forks stilled on nearby tables as guests pretended to eat, their eyes flicking toward the Rowlands, who sat stiffly at the center of the storm. Tessa stood nearby, arms folded, calm in her composure, while her family unraveled under the glow of candlelight. It started with Camille. She snapped her napkin in half and glared across the table at Diane. You've always done this. Always taken her side. Jordan could do no wrong. And now Tessa gets to play the hero because she bought a cafe? You think I don't notice the favoritism? Her voice rose, sharp and bitter, echoing across the polished floor. Diane's lips pursed, her eyes flashing. Camille, don't be absurd. I've bent over backward to support all of you. But Camille was far from done. She jabbed a finger into the air. Support? Please. You've never once praised me unless it made you look good. Every sale I've made, every client I've won, it's never enough. And now this? You let Tessa humiliate us, and you sit there pretending we're the ones in the wrong. Evan slammed his palm on the table, making the wine glasses rattle. Oh, spare me, Camille. You're not the victim here. At least you had choices. I've been shoved down a path I never wanted. College, law school, the firm. It's all because Dad wanted a son who would carry his name. I never had a chance to figure out what I wanted. Howard cleared his throat, his voice low and strained. Evan, that's not fair. Evan's laugh was hollow, bitter. Not fair. Dad, you dictated my entire life. I've been choking on your expectations for decades. And for what? To sit here and be told I'm ungrateful? To watch Tessa, the black sheep, suddenly own the place we're eating in. The words struck like lightning, and the storm spread. Camille and Evan turned on each other next. Camille calling him weak, Evan calling her selfish. Their insults tangled in the air until no one could separate one grievance from another. Howard raised his hands, his voice breaking with desperation. Enough! We're in public. Stop this. But it was too late. The arguments spiraled like wildfire, scorching every thread of composure they had left. Customers leaned closer to their own tables, whispering behind their hands, some with pity, others with intrigue. The Rowlands, once so pristine, so obsessed with appearances, were exposing every crack in front of an audience. Diane tried to hush them, her cheeks blazing red. "You're embarrassing me," she hissed, but her voice was drowned beneath the storm of accusations. Tessa watched it unfold, silent, steady, the weight of vindication pressing warmly against her chest. For years, she had been the scapegoat, the problem child, the one excluded to preserve their image. Now, their image lay shattered on the cafe floor. Finally, chairs scraped back. Camille stormed out first, muttering curses. Evan followed, jaw tight and eyes wild. Diane grabbed her coat with shaking hands, avoiding every gaze, while Howard trailed after her, shoulders slumped. One by one, they spilled into the night, broken and divided. And Tessa remained, standing tall in the cafe that was now hers, watching them leave in pieces. The cafe was quiet again, but not empty. The Rowlands had stormed out hours earlier, leaving only the faint trace of their perfume and cologne hanging in the air. Tessa stood for a moment, breathing it in, then letting it go. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to chase after them, to explain herself, to beg for their love. Instead, she walked back toward the long table where Jordan and the cafe staff were waiting, plates of food still warm, laughter beginning to replace the tension that had filled the room earlier. Jordan raised her glass when she saw her. "You did it, Tess. You finally stood up to them." Tessa smiled, a little shaky but genuine. "I didn't just stand up to them. I stood up for myself. And maybe for us." The staff, Mariah the baker, Devin the waiter, and Rosa the cook, beamed at her. These people hadn't known her long, but in the short weeks since she bought the cafe, they'd treated her with more kindness than her family ever had. They'd stayed late, helped her repaint walls, shared ideas for menus. Tonight, when the Rowlands had tried to belittle her, the staff had stood beside her quietly, their presence more powerful than words. As plates were passed and laughter bubbled up again, the door opened, and Maribel Ortiz stepped in. She was no longer the owner, but she carried herself like someone who had poured her soul into the place. She walked over to Tessa, her eyes warm. "I just wanted to see how things went tonight," she said softly, and then her gaze swept the cafe, landing on Tessa's steady face. "And I see it went exactly as it should." Tessa felt her throat tighten. "I don't know if I could have done this without you. Thank you for trusting me with Seabreeze." Maribel shook her head with a small smile. "No, thank you for saving it. I can see now, it's in the right hands." They embraced, and when Maribel left, Tessa returned to the table. She looked around at the people gathered there, not the family she'd been born into, but the family she had chosen, and who had chosen her back. For the first time in years, she felt light, free of the weight of trying to prove herself to people who would never see her worth. Dinner was simple: roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce. But every bite tasted better than any feast she had ever shared with her parents or siblings. Each laugh echoed louder than the criticism she had grown up with. As the evening wound down, Tessa leaned back, her gaze drifting across the cafe. The walls no longer felt like a place of exclusion. They felt like hers, warm, safe, alive. This wasn't revenge, not really. It wasn't about watching her family crumble. It was about reclaiming her own place in the world. For the first time in her life, Thanksgiving finally felt like home. Do you believe Tessa was right to walk away from her family and build her own life? Or should she have kept trying to win their approval? Share your thoughts down in the comments. I'd really love to hear what you think. And if stories like this resonate with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, tap the like, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.